Hey gang, it's Mitchell Anthony, Chief Investment Officer for Mitchell Anthony Capital Management. And I'm here today with my senior analyst, Kyle Aaron, to talk about news flow and how it affects the financial markets. That's what our show, Beat the Bogey, is all about. It's how we take news flow and turn it into investment decisions to help us create alpha for our clients. We've had a lot of news flow the last few weeks, and it hasn't been particularly good news. It's been about a virus that's threatening the world, threatening health, and threatening the financial markets and the state of the economy. And so we're going to talk a bit about this news flow and what it really means to the financial markets and to the world's economies. So stay tuned in. We'll be right back with another very interesting episode of Beat the Bogey.
Hello world, wake me up to another good morning, time to go. Got that smile upon my face, 'cause there's excitement in the chase, this I know.
Okay, gang, so we're back. So let's talk about this coronavirus, Kyle. Let's talk a little bit about what it is in particular and how it differs from some of the other viruses that we've seen threaten the world's health over the last decade or two. I know there's been lots of talk about this virus and how it's a virus that's common in animals and how it mutates to humans and how it can spread easily to humans. It started out in China, in the Wuhan area of Wuhan, correct? What do we know about this virus?
Yeah, that's right. So it's the coronavirus is kind of the family of viruses here. The one that we've got now has been officially named COVID-19, coronavirus 2019. But there have been other coronaviruses in the past, like SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, MERS, Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome. Generally, these viruses affect the respiratory syndrome and cause things that are kind of flu-like but more extreme. But like you said, generally the origin is animal, and you've got places in Wuhan, for example, markets that sell kind of wild animals, things like bats and other kind of exotic creatures that are used in typical Chinese dishes or in medicine. And what happens is you've got this infected bat, for example, that ends up in somebody's bat soup, and then all of a sudden the bacteria or the virus has gone from the creature to the human, and it kind of spreads from there.
So let's talk a little bit about viruses in general and why some viruses, are more threatening to others, and why we have to quarantine the world sometimes from these viruses that suddenly break out. And I guess that the reality is the most important part of evaluating a virus is how deadly is this virus? Is this a deadly virus? Does it kill a good majority of the people that get it, or does it really not? I think the average human virus kills less than 0.5% of people who get it. Maybe it's even less than that, I'm not sure, but it's very, very small. But some of the viruses we've had historically have been quite deadly. And but tell me a little bit about this, Kyle, in terms of how deadly this virus has been versus some of our more deadly viruses that we've had historically in the world over the last decade or two.
Yeah, a fair kind of thing to wonder about this. And you're right. So it's even less than you kind of guessed at. So the common flu, right? Flu virus, kind of seasonal. This is 0.05% mortality rate. So of those that have that, that's about how many people die. And so in the case of the flu, this is a very, we kind of think about these viruses on the spectrum of infectiousness, which is kind of how easy it is to spread, and mortality rate, deadliness, which is how often, once you've got it, it kills you. So lots and lots of people get the flu virus. Very few people die as a percentage of those who have gotten it. So now you look at some of the other coronaviruses like we talked about. SARS, for example, back in the 2002-2004 range. It doesn't have kind of the same infection rate as the flu, where that over a span of about 6 months, that it kind of existed before it kind of mysteriously went away almost. It infected about 8,000 people in that 6-month period that it was on the world stage. And of those, it killed about 10%.
So SARS killed 10% of the people who got it, but only about 8,000 people got it.
That's exactly right.
So we were able to contain it and keep people from getting it. In the case of the coronavirus, how many people have got it thus far that we kind of guesstimate?
Yeah, so it seems like at this point, and it's fluctuating constantly, but it appears to be about 60,000 people over the span of since, say, late December to now. So maybe 2 months or so.
And the majority of those people have been in China, correct? How many of those cases have been limited to China, and how many have been in the U.S., for example?
Yeah, so within the U.S., we've got, as of today, we've got 15 reported cases.
15.
There have been no deaths in the U.S.
No deaths.
These have all been linked to people that were either in Wuhan specifically, or it was maybe the spouse of somebody who had been in Wuhan, as far as we know. So not kind of a lot of widespread spread, if you will.
So this virus has been mostly contained to China, mostly contained to one area of China called Wuhan. How many people has it killed thus far? Is it a few thousand?
Yeah, so getting back to the mortality rate, while this one is clearly more infectious, right? I mean, SARS was 8,000 people over 6 months. Here we're looking at 60,000 people over a couple of months. But of those, we're looking at about a 2% mortality rate. So about 1,300 people or so have died. And yeah, interesting to note. So this is almost relegated exclusively to China in Wuhan and the Hubei province. It's about 60 million people in total there. But, death-wise, one death in the Philippines outside of the China region, one in Hong Kong, all the rest specifically in the China region. So in terms of what's happening around the rest of the globe, while this is certainly serious, there hasn't been a lot of actual death and destruction.
So can we say that, what can we say about the contagion of this virus? Is it within the virus that it's just more contagious, or is it because we haven't been we haven't quarantined the world as quickly as maybe we should have, and hence we let it spread? What do we know about that thus far? What do we anticipate this high spread rate is tied to? It seems like there's been talk that it's more tied to the virus seems to be caught easier than other deadly viruses. Is that correct?
Yeah, it seems like it's kind of a sliding scale, it appears, with these coronaviruses for the most part, where they're either more infectious or more deadly. We didn't even get to the deadliness of MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, but that, over a span of since it still actually kind of exists now with an occasional case, since 2012, there's only been, say, 2,000 cases, but it's got a 30% fatality rate. So where you've got these ones that really don't spread that easily, they tend to be quite a bit more deadly. Now, in terms of kind of analyzing what we've got here, it's tough. I would say that the quarantine that has been put into place is maybe unprecedented. They've kind of got the whole of Hubei and its inner cities like Wuhan quarantined. This is on the scale of 60 million people.
So 60 million people are kind of isolated. You can't get into that area. You can't come out of that area of China, correct? That's what China has done to try to quarantine off this virus.
That's exactly it. And then around the world, generally speaking, any people that are incoming that have traveled to that region within the incubation period, this is about 14 days, are being quarantined when they arrive in the US or wherever else.
And what does that mean?
So if, for example, a flight comes in, is incoming from that region of China, once it arrives in the US, they keep the people that are on this flight that have been to that region segregated for the entirety of the incubation period so they can watch and see whether or not they start to exhibit symptoms. They're also giving them lab tests that can determine whether or not they've got the coronavirus before they're kind of let back into the public. And this is largely why you haven't seen this big spread in the US and other places besides China, where in China it had time to kind of manifest and spread before it was caught. And even to that point, in the past, China has been criticized for having not kind of acknowledged its problem quickly enough. Understandably so, right? You don't want to scare people off. In a place that has tourism, this can kind of destroy a local economy. But in the SARS case, it was months before it was kind of acknowledged to the world. Here it was a matter of weeks. So as much as there might still be criticism in the media, especially of the proactiveness of China in combating this, I would say it's been good. The efforts in China and globally have been good.
What has been the market's response to this virus? Haven't our markets kind of been a bit volatile here over the last several weeks as we've worried about this virus and its impact on the globe, its impact on kind of travel and commerce? And is it going to slow the globe down and knock us into a recession? Is it going to affect any industries in particular that we're concerned about? It does seem like the markets have kind of been making new highs throughout this contagion, but yet the industries that are more susceptible to this and more affected by this seem to have braced hard, and there's been some significant sell-offs in industries where, I guess I might say, to make it easier, where people congregate. Any kind of industry where there's a congregation of people, whether it's casinos or cruise ships or theme parks like Disney or airlines, anywhere people are congregating, any business that has people congregating, there's been a lot of concern there, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this is kind of getting to the heart of what we want to look at here is, what do we need to kind of consider here investment-wise? Like you say, the broad market is at all-time highs. And interestingly, this is pretty consistent with what's happened in the past. SARS, MERS, other diseases like this. In those cases where the market was, initially volatile, generally within a month or less, the market was back to positive territory.
So the impact being is these viruses don't really seem to change the course of the economy. They're here for a while, and then they seem to burn out 3, 6, 8 months later, and they're gone. And these were kind of short-term problems for the economy that we kind of worked through. But maybe some could be longer-term problems for some industries or not.
Yeah, so that's what's kind of interesting is you look at the industries like you mentioned that have to do with people congregating and travel. Like you said, the cruise lines, right, where you've got this cruise liner off the coast of Japan that's been quarantined. Right, this clearly has an impact on these companies' businesses. And so what happens, what we're seeing now and what we've seen in the past, is these companies take a bigger hit. If the market goes down a couple percent, they go down 2-3 times that generally with the onset of the disease, and then with specifically, quarantines happening around stuff that can send them down even further. But when you're looking longer term, what usually ends up happening here is that this becomes contained. We work on a vaccine, whatever happens. The earnings hit tends to be kind of isolated. And so you do have a bigger sell-off in some of these travel experience names, but they end up kind of roaring back as you're looking longer term. And the fundamental picture for these companies hasn't changed. It's more of a short-term, not a long-term problem. People aren't going to stop traveling forever because of this to China.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you look at a company like Disney, whose theme park in China is shut down right now, and you realize, well, that's going to hurt earnings, but is it going to change the earnings picture, for the next year or 2 or 5 years? No.
Right. You're probably just getting some pent-up demand, so it's going to be at capacity every day after it reopens. Yeah, I think that's a fair way to look at it.
Airlines, certainly travel's down, but people, once this is over, will have pent-up demand to travel, and they'll be right back on the airline traveling again. Same thing with cruises. We'll build pent-up demand when it's safe to go in the water again. People will go in the water again. And so it could be that there's some buying opportunities being created here in some of these stocks that have sold off as we've worried about this virus becoming an epidemic that doesn't go away and that it doesn't burn out in 6 months, right?
Right.
So let's talk about where are we at in terms of this virus's growth rate. Is the virus still growing? Is the number of cases that are being reported still accelerating? Or are we seeing a deceleration in the growth of the number of cases that are being reported or identified.
Yeah, that's fair. And this is, so you want to kind of, when the tide seems to have turned, this is maybe the time when you can think about getting into some of these names, not wanting to get in too early to things like a Wynn or a Royal Caribbean or something necessarily. So to your point, it's interesting because just yesterday we were looking at the numbers, and the market had a pretty strong rally yesterday because it was the day-over-day increase in new cases was the lowest that it had been since the end of January, and it capped 8 consecutive days of decreases in the number of new cases found. It was a big story all over the news last night and this morning, which kind of knocked the markets off initially, which then rallied back, which said that there's 14,000 or some odd new cases discovered in China.
Yesterday,
yeah.
Yesterday, the news reported today and last night that we had a sharp increase in the number of cases reported.
Right.
But
right.
what did we kind of figure that news flow out to be? It wasn't really good news flow, was it?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was, yeah, it wasn't maybe accurate news flow. It was maybe written a little bit more to scare than to inform. And what happened was basically that China, kind of out of resources and time to take lab tests for everybody that might have the disease, they've resorted now to people that are presenting the symptoms, kind of a clinical diagnosis of having the coronavirus. They've been keeping track of those people, but not putting them into the official number. So they now added them in. So it's not like all of a sudden 14,000 new cases overnight. Oh my God, this thing is exploding. We just had this other tally that we didn't include, but now are including. So with that, we've got about 60,000 people now that are kind of globally potentially infected with this. But it still stands that number may have kind of stabilized and is receding from its peak in terms of new case growth.
So the industries that have been hit the hardest have been, we know, gambling, casinos, Wynn, resorts, that does a tremendous amount of business in China, and all of a sudden the ability for people to congregate in casinos is really not happening. They've been hit hard. That's stocks off 20% or more. We know cruise ships have been off 15% or more. And airlines have been off maybe 10 to 15%. Those have been the harder hit areas. The Disneys of the world hit less hard. Who else? Where's the softer side of the impact been felt? Is there anybody else that's maybe worth looking at here besides those industries?
I mean, those are maybe the best places to look. You've had a little bit of disruption where, like with Apple, for example, they've got part of the supply chain, or a big part of the supply chain is there in China, and so they get hit a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I think by and large, it's the travel and experience names which may be presenting as good opportunities to pick up.
So what do we look for here next? What do we want to look for before we say, all right, let's jump on another name here? We've already increased our holdings a bit in Royal Caribbean on this news, and what might be the reason to buy a casino or a hotel resort or a group of airlines? What are we looking for here?
Yeah, I think that's, as we've said, that's a fair thing to wonder. I think you're certainly looking for a slowdown in the growth rate of new cases. You're looking for signs that businesses have started to turn things around in China. This could be Disney reopening their park. This could be cruises, opening up voyages again to the China region, where you've seen a lot of these companies kind of staying away or having employees stay home, where it's no longer kind of dangerous to be in that region. I think there's a couple of key things. And then additionally, you've got medically, it's tough to tell because there's reports that don't always seem to be accurate that come out that talk about vaccines that are months away that could be here by summer. But they've been working on treatments that address the coronavirus because as a family it's been around for a long time. So we may well be on the cusp of something that can fight that very soon. So there could be kind of a medical discovery that could be pretty promising in terms of good timing to get back in.
So to summarize, basically what we know about this virus is this is not a real deadly virus. It's not a virus that's likely to hang around very long. It's probably going to run its course and burn itself out within 3 to 6 months and be gone. It's going to have some limited effect likely on the global economies and the industries. It's probably hurting travel the most. It's having some impact on great American superstars like Disney, maybe creating some buying opportunities in names like that, and in some of the cruise lines and gambling and hotels and airlines. And so I think, the reality is this is just news that scares, but probably news that really doesn't change the course of our global economy or the industries that are even directly affected by it. And hence, probably not a reason why we're going to jump out and sell any names or change our exposure to equities because we're worried of a recession being on the horizon.
Totally fair. I think if anything, this just may present some good buying opportunities.
Okay, well, there you go. That concludes another episode of Beat the Bogey. We hope you enjoyed our show. Stay tuned in because we'll have another one coming next week. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm going for the ride and find myself, I am alive, and I soar. Still I run towards the wind and let the challenge draw me in, 'cause I want more.